Okay. Okay. Loan, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Kai.
So you and me, we met up, was it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, for the first time in person. You introduced me to a fantastic coffee spot in Dubai, which I've never been to before, but I'm really looking forward to going back to. So thanks for that. One topic we spoke about a whole bunch of topics, but one thing that we discussed that stood out for me was oftentimes you'll get clients coming to you, or potential clients coming to you in Trellis, saying that, hey, we've seen this headless commerce, composable commerce trend. We want in on it. We think it'll be great for us too. And from your perspective, you're of course a supporter and an advocate of headlessness and API first and that kind of thing. But it's not always, from your perspective, the right option for every company in every situation. Am I right in saying that?
See, yeah, I think that headless is a fantastic architecture, and it solves a lot of problems for larger scale merchants, and sometimes medium scale, sometimes also startups that are just building a system for the first time, and they just need something that's going to withstand crazy amounts of scaling. And it does do the job in that regard, but it does come with some drawbacks, right? It comes with costs. First of all, it costs a lot more than headful builds that you would find typically on Shopify, BigCommerce, or sometimes Magento. It just costs a lot more to build headless, right? So you have to think as a merchant about the investment. You do, on the other side, get a storefront that's going to be decoupled from your backend, and which will last you a lot longer. So should you re-platform, etc., you're going to be able to keep the storefront and make your investment worth it over time. But it's not the case for every merchant, right? Not every merchant needs the storefront that's going to last 10 years. Not every merchant needs the flexibility and the crazy amounts of investment. I mean, it's pretty typical for headless builds to start, from what I'm seeing with the average, RFPs and the average, builds that we get at Trellis. Usually, you would start your budget for a headless storefront at, a couple $100,000, let's say, let's put it at 200, something like that, $150,000, $200,000 for, something in the headless range, as kind of your entry door into headless. And then it's upwards, depending on the amount of customization that you need. It's anywhere upwards of that. So you could reach into the millions easily, because now you're in the big boys league, right? So that's just something to keep in mind, right? That a lot of companies are not aware of the investments that come with it.
Yeah. How about again, startups or medium-sized companies, not necessarily enterprises, who they've heard about headless, they've heard about, again, the longevity benefits. They may not need the entire ecosystem today, but they look at it from a perspective of, okay, because it's headless, because we're building something Mac and composable, we can sort of start with the bare bones. Is it in that situation, does it become more viable? I.e., they just want a headless CMS, they want a headless commerce solution along with that, and they want to build their own front end. And then maybe they've got one or two other pieces of MarTech in there, but nothing, we're not talking about ERPs and the entire shebang. In that case, is it more viable, or even then should they still probably shy away from that?
No, it is, and it can very well be, depending on, again, depending on the scale of the project and depending on the technologies that you use. There's a few pieces of software that are available nowadays that used to not be on the market previously, a couple of years ago. So I'm thinking about eCommerce, for example, which is a great starter kit to build headless storefront that gets you basically a fully working open source storefront that connects to a lot of different e-commerce backends. You have BigCommerce, you have Shopify, Swell, just a bunch of options really. You can use that, and you essentially have, in about 2 hours, you already have a working storefront, and then your developers or your agency can customize that. And that's a great way to get started on a budget with headless. Building your own storefront from scratch, though, that's usually not a great option if you're on a budget. Or, you can use, some of our partners at Trellis, actually, Shogun Frontend, for example. Great option for headless on a budget, and I think that you can kind of ease your business into headless gradually, starting with these solutions and then going more and more custom over time. Don't necessarily get the big guns out, right away, and blow all of your budget on a shiny new fully custom solution, that's going to do nothing but cause headaches in your company, because your company is not ready for it. You have to be rational, and you have to do it gradually, is what I'm thinking. Because usually companies will hear the word headless and they'll think, oh my God, we need to get in on this. We need to go all in. We need to change everything. That's not necessarily the case. Just go gradually, go with the flow, and be careful with your investments. Otherwise, you might end up with, a solution that you might, have struggles with just keeping up with the sheer amount of complexity overnight. It's going to be a huge change for your company.
Well, I mean, we've been writing about headless CMS, headless commerce for many years with different clients. When it first sort of burst onto the scene as, a new architecture, a new strategy, one of the main benefits that we'd always lead with was you could do this gradually, right? You could start small. You could start with just, instead of buying a suite full of products, no names, instead of buying a big suite full of products that you won't use maybe for the first 2 years or at all, you can just start small. You can select this, 3 or 4 MarTech or pieces or platforms that you need to get started with. And as you grow, as you scale, you can invest more in your ecosystem. But also, it seems like as I spoke to you, as I speak to other agencies in the space, that benefit just sort of went over a lot of companies' heads, where it was like they sort of said, well, forget that, we'll just build the whole thing right now and end up spending more than we would have done on the suites anyway. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that we've got to convince people at this point to start gradually?
I think there is, a lot of misinformation out there about headless. The main one is that headless has to be complicated. It really doesn't. You have your e-commerce backend. Like the most simple headless build there is, your e-commerce backend. Think about your Shopify. You had a fully head full Shopify build before with your storefront being a Shopify theme, and you want to branch off of that to go headless. Well, keep your backend. You already have it. You have all your products in there. Keep your backend and use a pre-built storefront that to go along with it, that already has the connection for the API built in. That's the simplest solution there is. But I think people hear headless, they hear a bunch of things that are sometimes a little bit contradicting. But they hear custom ERP connections. While we're in there, let's add that. While we're in there, let's add this. And it all adds up, right? It's a lot of while we're in there. I wouldn't be able to identify a single reason why we're seeing that, but definitely people seem to have forgotten that headless can be simple, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, it seems so. And I was shocked by that, quite frankly, because I thought, well, that's the main benefit, right? Well, that's one of the main benefits of going in this direction, is that you don't have to do everything at once. But there we go. I'm interested to ask, so let's say a customer, well, in fact, before I get to that, what are the platforms that Trellis prefers using, headlessly and headfully, as you put it, right? What are like the 2 or 3 on either side of the fence that is the go-to platforms for you guys?
E-commerce backend platforms?
Yeah.
Definitely BigCommerce is our number one when it comes to headless builds. It's also very powerful for headful, normal headful builds. But for headless, it actually gives you so much flexibility for, one of the biggest, like sort of well-known platforms. It gives you a lot more flexibility than Shopify as a developer to build headless experiences. One thing it has kind of lacking for it is the lack of a truly, headless checkout experience. But they do have something that gets very close to it. Your customers will still be redirected to a different domain for the checkout experience, but you can still build out a fully custom React experience that will be hosted on that domain. Shopify now with Shopify Plus has a fully headless checkout, so your experience can be all on the same storefront, all the way to checkout if you need to build a custom checkout. But the solution, all in all, will give you less flexibility than BigCommerce. I would say BigCommerce is my number one recommendation these days for headless builds, and usually for a gradual approach as well. We'll get a client started headful on BigCommerce, because not only because it's the best solution for their needs, but also because it allows for the flexibility they need for the down the road when they'll move to headless, because we'll have a multi-phase plan where phase 1 will be headful, phase 2 will add components like Algolia and an ERP, etc. And phase 3 will build a completely headless storefront for them, and we know the platform will support that. So yeah.
Okay, fair enough. You mentioned headless checkout, and it's something that doesn't get discussed much, to be honest, or not as much as it should, I don't think. What are the benefits of having headless checkout, and what's the difference between headless checkout and headless commerce?
So, well, a headless storefront will usually be, your catalog and your browsing experience for your customers to just to look at what you have on offer and search for products. Look at your product detail page, add things to their cart, manage their cart, go into your account, with your previous orders and things like that. And then, when you go from the cart to the checkout and you go to make your payment and add your billing address, etc., that's where the checkout piece comes in, right? You land into the checkout at this stage. The thing is, building a fully headless custom checkout is complex. It is a very, very complex endeavor, and most merchants going headless do not need a headless checkout. I need to preface that, So my point about BigCommerce was not necessarily a deterring factor for 99% of businesses out there. It doesn't change anything. You would want to keep a normal checkout anyways, but it is for the 1% that need the extra flexibility, that want to have the smoothest experience possible, where you're not redirecting your customers when it comes to the payment step. It is something to keep in mind, if that's something you need. But usually, 99% of merchants don't necessarily need a headless checkout. We usually see that it's hundreds of hours to build a custom checkout. It's usually not worth it for many people.
Yeah, one of those areas of your website or app that probably is best to not build yourself, I would imagine. What's the percent? I'll give you the actual percentage, but rough numbers of how many clients have you worked with that are using WordPress, either in a headless commerce way or headfully? What's the sort of percentage there? And are you seeing, is a general trend that the bigger they get, the more likely they are to move off of WordPress? Is that the trend that you see?
Well, so WordPress runs something like 80% of the web, I think. I forgot what the stat is, but the number is insane, right? And you can't dunk on WordPress too much, because at the end of the day, it does power a lot of what we're seeing on the web out there. That's just the truth. Now, when it comes to using it for a headless build, though, I would tend to say that there are better options. Just because WordPress was not built for that, same as using it for an e-commerce engine with WooCommerce, it was not built for that. It was built to be a blog CMS. In the 2000s, it was not built to become an e-commerce platform, and in the same manner, it was not built to become a headless platform down the road. Now you have plugins that will give you like a GraphQL API for your WordPress instance, and they work, yes, until you start to use custom third-party plugins, and you need to access their data from your headless front end, and that's usually where things get a little bit tough. And that's where you start to see the limitations of a solution that was not built to be that from the get-go. So in terms of percentage, I would say we're not seeing a whole ton of WordPress business, but when we do, it's always migrations out of WordPress. So
okay.
If that gives you any indication, I would say that nothing wrong with WordPress, but there comes a point where you're going to outgrow it, and that's what we're seeing as more of an upmarket agency. We're definitely seeing the migrations out of WordPress more than people getting started on WordPress, and that's just because of the market that we speak to usually is at this stage that they're starting to outgrow it.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Another question I forgot to ask before, which is, we spoke about companies maybe approaching headless commerce wrong, or the wrong point in the sort of life cycle of their company. How can a company know whether, before getting on a call with you, obviously, how can they know by self-analyzing that, okay, we should go for a headless strategy or stick with headful? What are the sort of signs they should look for?
Well, it depends. First of all, it depends on the kind of experience that they want to build. If they want to build an extremely, custom experience, for example, I'm working right now on an RFP for a fairly large company that needs they need a sort of a quiz for customers to answer a bunch of questions and be recommended a product that will fit their use case, because they have thousands of products, and they're selling home accessories, and it depends on the size of the home, and it depends on is it multi-story, et cetera, et cetera. And they will narrow down exactly what products you need within their catalog of thousands of products by asking you these questions, and just knowing, okay, these are the 5 products that you can choose from that will be compatible with the sort of home that you live in. Now, if you want to build something like this, then headless is usually the preferred option, because that does not fall within the typical boundaries of a headful build, where you'll have your product listing page and your PDP and your categories and your search, and that's it. That's a lot more complicated. So the first thing to look at is the type of experience. Is your experience something that differs from the typical e-commerce experience or not? If your customer path from the moment they land on the website until the moment they check out is 99% typical e-commerce, where again, search, product listing page, PDP, cart, you probably don't need to go headless, unless you have some very specific use cases where, for example, you're dealing with a crazy amount of scale, or you have multi-storefronts. You have a storefront for each region of the world that you might be present in, and things like that. You have to look at the complexity of your build, essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense. You make a great point that if your e-commerce experience looks like 99% of other e-commerce experiences, and it looks the same as it has for like 10, 15 years, which is again just browse products, put it in the cart, check out, then obviously, not obviously, but most of the time headless doesn't make too much sense in that situation. When headless first came about, it was almost like with VR, right? I thought, okay, this is going to open the door now to people, to companies doing so much more, interesting things or innovative things in the e-commerce experience, i.e. that poll sounds fantastic. I just thought, oh man, think of the possibilities, because now they've got the, this sort of easier way to integrate different tools into the system and pull in data from elsewhere and so on and so forth. And really, we haven't really, like with VR, we haven't really seen much innovation in that sense. We have sort of seen, just like, as we always have, that sort of linear experience, not trying to rock the boat too much with the UX UI, maybe not trying to add in extra steps, I guess. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that even though headless has come along now, there hasn't really been that much innovation in what an e-commerce experience looks like?
I think a lot of it is because the headless builds out there that have been built up until today answer a very specific need, which is companies needing to kind of break away from the typical school of thought of apps and plugins. When you have a Shopify instance, for example, you have apps that will do everything for you, and they will manage things on the back end, but they will also show things on the front end. You'll inject your app into a given set of pages that you need your app to show. For example, if you have like a buy now, pay later, app, you're going to have their button on the PDP and things like that. Usually these retailers will reach a point where, it's a bit like, apocalypse, if that makes any sense, where, they have too many apps and it's gotten absolutely impossible to manage, because these apps are fighting against each other, etc. And they just need to have a website that works with the functionality that they build with these apps. They don't need anything, essentially custom, or anything that's so different to the website that they currently have. They just need something that's gonna work fine with the growing number of requirements they have, that they have to reach a limit with the school of thought of apps. And so that's why usually they go to headless and they build the exact same thing, and it works better, obviously, because now they're not dealing with a plethora of apps that they're injecting into their pages. Now it's actually custom built and it talks to the APIs directly, etc., and it's a lot more efficient. But they essentially build the same thing, right? Where
Yeah,
usually they don't tend to use that as an opportunity, to go for a more daring design or things like that. They usually look at it from a very rational perspective. Obviously, budget comes into play
of
here,
course.
but it is usually what's happening.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that like true innovation is incredibly difficult, right? Which is why like the likes of Apple and Amazon and Tesla are rewarded so much when they do truly innovate things, like inventing the iPhone, for example, and Prime, so on and so forth. Because you'd think that as new technology comes along, well, okay, then it just makes more sense that new things will just suddenly emerge within 6 months, and it will just be super quick like that, and everyone will do different things. But the reality on the ground is 99% of companies are still struggling with managing all the technologies from like 5 years ago and trying to get that right, and then you forget about like taking advantage of a new technology to the fullest extent, right? So it's just a good reminder that innovation is extremely difficult, and it's not something that happens very often. And it usually would take an Apple to come along and invent the App Store, for example, for the door to be broken down or the wall to be broken down for interesting things to happen beyond just a poll, maybe even although I like that, but beyond that, beyond maybe just augmented reality. Although again, IKEA, they've done a good job with that. But yeah, I know we're short on time, so we're going to wrap up. This has been great. I wish we could go for a bit longer, but hopefully we can have you back again next year. Yeah, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me, Kay. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.